And
Thanks, Allison. Hi, Anajay. Hi, everybody. It's so nice. So, Anajay, we decided to do this, but I think let's start with a little bit of a backstory of how we met, and how we've become really good friends, and why we decided we should get together and do this, panel discussion. So, could you just say how we met a little bit?
Sure. We met, I think I read an article that you wrote that was introducing the concept of intergenerational trauma. And in the article, you spoke about indigenous people, some people say Native Americans, here in Turtle Island, the United States, as well as Jewish people who, of course, are victims of genocide. And I wrote you or sent you an email and said, Scott, wait a minute, hold it, stop, red light. You have to talk about people of African descent, also known as formerly enslaved people of African descent here in America. Some people say African Americans. And from that conversation, you were just so open about it, said, Onaji, you are right. And it just so happened that you were putting on a webinar 1 or 2 days right after that. And you invited me, and then you just can't get rid of me since then.
Well, and I mean, I brought up that slide as a kind of like just a memory of that. But do you remember this slide here? You said we need to include post-traumatic slavery syndrome by Joy DeGroy, and you had written this quote to me, and just say a little bit about this, because I think it sets the tone of today, of why this is such an important discussion in today's world that we live in.
Okay, before that quote, what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer symbolically tobacco. I'm going to, as well as honor the land in which I'm on, which was formerly occupied, caretakers by the Lenape people. And I'm also going to burn sage as a way of purifying the space. Right. So these are ancient spiritual practices that have been used here in Turtle Island and also around the world. So most people of color, first world people who've been on the land for so many centuries, maybe millenniums, that we've had these practices that we always wanted to connect. In Lakota, we say, mite ote ose, all our relations, mite kote o yase, all our relations, right? The two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, those that swim, those that fly, those that crawl. So it's making the connection that we are all related. So I'm going to start there and go on to say, when we ignore or overlook post-traumatic slavery syndrome or historical trauma or whatever reason we leave it out of the discussion, what happens is the trauma continues because it's the trauma of neglect. And what we're doing now is opening up the conversation to say that it's a lot of information that we haven't gotten, people living here in the United States. So it's opening up the circle. There's a statement that says whoever controls the diameter of your information also controls the circumference of your understanding. So if we're limited in our information, we just won't have the understanding that would go along with it. So this conversation is, I think, it's a tribute to you and I as friends, as colleagues, as social workers, and we're just inviting the audience to share in what we have experienced and seeing if it can be expanded.
Yeah, my contribution today will be us dialoguing and also getting a lot of Q&A, hopefully from our audience today. And this may be a part 1, and we may have a part 2 and a part 3 discussion. But I'm wired in the way I am with practical application to take dialogue and discussion And then also, how does that translate into action? Like the idea of going from trauma-informed to trauma-responsive. So as we got to know each other, I was able to share with you my experience as a professor at Savannah State University, which is the oldest historically black college and university in Georgia. And I was one of the only white professors there. And I got the opportunity to teach master's level students, and I asked the director if I could have community organizing every semester for 3 years. And each class took the baton from the other. And so one of the things that I'm seeing is that we think of family therapy as just for the family, but the principles that were used in the Midtown Community Center were also prevalent and able to be utilized and pivoted for healing racial inequality, structural racism, but empowerment of the community. And I want to contend for the idea of family systems trauma, whereas social workers, we talk about the micro level, the macro level, and the meso level. And I think this is also a framework that people may like or utilize for their communities, where we utilize great principles of family systems theory that can be, in essence, community family therapy. Because a lot of times communities, whether white, black, Jewish, Native American, whatever it is, can get stuck in the trauma-informed piece and the trauma-responsive piece. So this is we live in interesting times, unprecedented times. So our relationship has grown. And I think sometimes we're like peas and carrots. You know, we really work well together. So, I agree. Yeah, right. So, just kind of like really to put handlebars on today, because we only have, like I said, an hour to, 45 minutes of discussion and then 15 minutes of question and answer. But just to kind of give everybody, we've given a brief background of us, but the theme is, how do we use a family systems lens to heal racial inequality? Anajay is going to really start off the discussion about racism has been such a difficult task for people living in the United States that there is a myth versus a reality. And the strategy, one of the strategies that he really recommends as a starting point is appreciative inquiry, where white and black and all races can sit down together to talk about this openly. And I'll actually talk about how we utilize the same strategy as a first step when we worked as Savannah State University and Midtown Community. We started with appreciative inquiry. And then I'll just share some highlights of a practical application case study where I was able to be privileged and honored to work with the Midtown Community as a facilitator with Savannah State University, and how these FST tools were utilized to help bring about tremendous change in less than a year. And a little bit of the backstory. So this is my friend Anajay, and Anajay, just a little bit about yourself, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. African born here in America. Most of my life I worked as a social worker for over 35 years. And it was a parallel process. As a social worker was my vocation. My avocation was that of a human rights advocate, particularly on the question of reparations. And one aspect of reparations deals with rehabilitation, which is really everything I'm doing is about the rehabilitation of people who've been victims of mass trauma, egregious human rights violations. And I'm studying with you, Scott, with the family trauma lens system, and also I'm studying with Kate Hudgens, the therapeutic spiral method as well. And also I'll mention that that's also contained in my work as a doctorate candidate, a doctorate in social work candidate at the University of Southern California.
Excellent. and this is me. Yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
I'm so sorry. If Anajay can please explain appreciative inquiry,
we're actually gonna, we'll actually get to that as we go forward. So yeah, thanks, Allison. And just a little background on me: I have a PhD in social work and marriage and family therapy from Florida State. I have an MSW also from Florida State, and I have written 3 books, and I'm the founder of the Family Trauma Institute. So that's just a little bit about me.
Scott, let me also mention that we're certainly at this opportunity. I call it a kairos moment. Kairos from the Greek, that means a moment that's pregnant with possibility. We as social workers have just found out in June that the Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare have included a third, what is called Grand Challenge, and that Grand Challenge is racism. So we finally have space to talk about this subject that's been the very beginning of this country, let alone this profession. So I just want to mention that this Grand Challenge of racism, there are different places in which people are exploring this topic.
Well said, and I also would add, Anajay, that I think sometimes people see crisis as not a good thing, but also there's another way to look at crisis is an opportunity for change. And I think that that's kind of what propelled us to have this discussion, because crisis presents opportunity for change. And so one of the things we want to start out of the gate with is we wanted to show you a short snippet to get your reaction as an audience from Dr. Harrison from the Kaiser Family Foundation, where she talks about that the biggest barrier is to see racism in ourselves, but the biggest opportunity is to see racism in ourselves. So think about that for a second as we show this clip, because it's a really good onboarding to a discussion, because some people say, oh, well, this is a barrier. Well, it's also an opportunity, and we're going to be talking about both the barrier and the opportunity today. The other thing Dr. Harrison says that I think you'll see really interesting in this short video clip is she says the data around racial bias and its impact on mental health and physical health has always been there, but the appetite to act on it has not been there until now. So let me show you this quote, and then we're going to do a quick poll question, and then Anajay is going to, take that information and go to the next thing we want to talk about. So this is Dr. Harrison, and let me go ahead and pull this up.
This information has been there, and it's actually pretty old. It can make, and so you'll recognize them as, I was thinking.
We had, we'll do one more, but I know we're on a time constraint. Corey was curious if there's any data out there of successful intervention methods outside of racial equity training that has shown to have made a change when it comes to provider bias.
Yeah, so I'm actually looking at my computer so I can pull this reference for you right now. There's a really good literature actually that talks about the individual interventions you can make. Reference. This information has been there, and it's.
Why is it that this data is here, showing that there's methods that are tangible and accessible, but we're not seeing them used at all anywhere. But this conversation about racial bias is happening over and over again.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said before, and I'll put another layer on it. We don't want to see racism in ourselves. So overwhelmingly, before now, I'm telling you, and I'm just going to speak plainly and not mince my words, white ears are open now in a way that white ears have not been open. And white eyes are open in a way that white eyes have not been open. And white hearts are tolerating information that white hearts and brains could not tolerate before we were in this. And so people have been doing this research Literally, one of my children's friends' mothers, like, we are cool. This white lady, I was posting something on Facebook and she said, I'm trying to figure out if Black people are just now being able to raise their voices or if you've been raising your voices and we just haven't been hearing you. And I literally almost cussed at her. I said, are you kidding me? We have been screaming at the top of our lungs. And so I think that's the answer to your question. This information has been there. Overwhelmingly, the people that are doing this research are racial and ethnically not white. And so that already decreases distribution. That already decreases the value of it. It's a topic that is difficult to hear when you don't want to be contributing to this, but you are contributing to it by not being able to put your eyes on it. And so I think it's just difficult information to have, which is why I've
I'm going to ask Allison to post this poll. How many of you think that white hearts are more open for discussion, maybe not as towards as much as action, or maybe in certain parts of the country, certain communities, both discussion and application? But do you think white hearts today are more open for a discussion on racism today? Because that has huge implications for mental health practice as well as physical health, as well as change. And so let's post those results and have Anaje kind of look at those results. And so overwhelmingly right now we have 93% saying yes, 8% no. And so Anaje, would you speak to that a little bit? And I like this picture that you have here. Pictures sometimes worth 1,000 words.
So I'm certainly inspired, by the poll, and of course, I would say that this audience is educated and a well-meaning audience, and that we are pursuing this. Most of the audience, I think, are people who are familiar with ACEs and adverse childhood experiences. So this audience could be a special audience in that sense, in terms of people already having an orientation, a willingness, and even a past inquiry into what racism is and so forth and so on. So I'm inspired that, but I also will recognize the no, which I think was 13%, because certainly there are many people who are steeped in these ideas and practices of racism. 2 points I would say in terms of racism inside of us, as Dr. Nzinga had pointed out. I use the definition from the People's Institute of Survival and Beyond, and they say that racism is legitimate power plus racial prejudice. So if we're saying that that's a definition, legitimate power plus racial prejudice equals racism, then we have to say that that's a qualifier, which means that people of color, we do not have legitimate power. We have situational power. At some point, we might be given a position, such as the President of the United States, for 8 years, and guess what? It's gone. So without a really basic fundamental understanding of what racism is, we'll be going off in all different kinds of directions. So even when she says racism inside of us, I would have to qualify that to say that if we've been socialized in this race, as we all have been socialized, there is something which is called internalized racial superiority and internalized racial inferiority. So these are the internal dynamics that's happening in all of us, without our knowledge, without even our consent, right? So now,
I would. One thing that I love what you're saying right now, and one thing I would say is that sometimes there's a war between the head and the heart. And when she said, Dr. Harrison, white hearts are open, when the heart opens up, there can be more of a change versus just head knowledge. Or as we put that slide that she said, racism is a barrier, but also racism is an opportunity for change. And so is that a huge moment in our history today where the heart is opening up for white people and that we have to work together? It can't just be, oh, we're going to have this and this. Is that kind of where you were going a little bit, or?
In computer science, there's something called an if-and statement. If this is happening, then that can happen, right? So I'm going to qualify that with the if-and statement. If we understand this change is not what we need, if we understand it's correction from the harms, the disabilities, and the hurt that has been perpetrated against people of color, if we are willing to make corrections to all the centuries of injury, then we can have a change. If we understand that context is important, right? When context certainly has a lot to do with history, to learn our history and put things in proper perspective. If we are giving people a choice in the matter of their life, then we can actually witness this, and then if we can make connections. So when we talk about context, choice, and connection, this is connected to the polyvagal theory of the brain, how it works. So we have to be able to have the brain in a state of settlement and calmness so that it can actually participate. So the systems we're talking about has to change in terms of being able to change these statistics. What do we know? We know that infant mortality in the Black community is 11.4 per 1,000 part of the Black population. Indigenous is 9.4. Latino, we know it's 5 per 1,000 individuals. And in the white community is 4.8. And guess what? It should be 0 for all of them, right? So if there's something to say about getting to 0, that's where 0 should be. What we also know is that you have these policies in schools where we have 0 discipline policies that says if you do anything, you're being suspended. So we see Black children being put out of schools in just horrendous numbers all across the country. But let's look at those children who are in fact in substitute care, foster care, given up for adoption. 14% of the population, African Americans, our children, we comprise 45% of children in substitute care. As far as indigenous people, who are only 1.5 of the population, we see their numbers being 2.1%. As far as Latino, being 15% of the population, their children, 21%. Now, we look at the majority of white people in this country, 60% of the population, and they have 36%. Again, all these numbers should be 0. So if we're talking about evolved society, we're talking about a society that can make these numbers 0. And if we list, so let's go a step further. Let's look at the prison population. We know that 12% of the adult male population comprise 33% of the prison population. Indigenous people, I couldn't get, it's a lot of figures are just not available. But one source I found that said that they experience twice the rate of whites, right? So whites are 64% of the adult population. They're in 30%, so that means 60% of indigenous men are incarcerated. Latino, 16% of the adult population, comprising 23% of the prison population, right? So we're seeing these numbers and saying, where did these numbers come from? These numbers come from the original formula, the original scheme, the original schema, the original political, economic, social construction of this country back in 1776. In fact, the first law that was created was who could be an American, and it said that you had to be white, you had to be white, and you had to be 21. Which means what? Whiteness was something that was created. When English people came here, they were English. When Irish people came here, they was Irish. When Polish people came here, they was Polish. And then white was created as a way to pull that population out of humanity so that they could be elevated to the top of humanity. So when we talk about white supremacy, we're saying it was this concept that was created that rather than having people on an equal horizontal level, you created a hierarchy. what people.
Well, I think the statistics are important in context because you look at 60% of the population white, the number jumps up, but it's only a small percentage of the 60%. The black population, 14%, huge percentage of substitute care. And I think the next slide from ACEs and our discussion before today was really an eye-opener for me because I think I will say straight out, I've been blinded by the impact of racism on the clients I see. And if it's not spoken about or talked about, which you're going to talk about with appreciative inquiry, and I'm going to talk about with my work with Midtown, we don't see the impact of it. So the treatment that we use sometimes is not as impactful as if we had this knowledge. And so I wanted to bring this up here because I thought this was really, it ties a lot of things together with these statistics. So I'm going to let you talk through this, but this is really important about the pyramid here and microaggressions as a result of it. So if you wouldn't mind speaking about that, Anajay.
So some of you who may not be familiar with ACEs, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences, came out of a study with CDC and Kaiser Permanente in California, a managed care facility. And what they found through 17,000 of participants, that there was a direct correlation between the kinds of childhood experiences one has and the probability of contracting certain diseases later on in life. So many of these people are like 50 years ago. And what they found is that the higher the correlation, the greater the probability that you would experience social and emotional impairment, that you would adopt, health risky behaviors, that you would contract certain diseases, and would have an early death. So they had I think 12 or 13 of these factors. So we're saying, yes, that is true, but that was basically a white middle-class population. Now, when you start to use the same criteria within people of color and people starting to Black, indigenous, people of color populations, when you use this same criteria and you come into our neighborhoods, into our realities, we have to say, wait a minute, something's missing. What is this pyramid standing on? It's standing on oppression, and they just say social conditions, in the local context. And now we know that by one zip code, we can tell you how long you're going to live. How in the world is that possible? It's possible because we have structural racism and we have structural oppression. And that does what? That's built upon generational embodiment of historical trauma. Historical trauma that started with slavery, that started with genocide, that hasn't finished. And it's not just a question of the original assault, it's keeping those systems in place that generates these same statistics. So the original assault is not really the problem. The problem is how these systems remain deconstructed, and in there. And
Anajay, how does that lead to microaggression? Because I thought that was a really important term. How does one translate to the other?
So once you have the structure of oppression, then if people are socialized with inferiority and people are socialized with superiority, it's easy for them to then think of a certain kind of way and do certain actions. So example, Scott, if you and I walk into a store together and there's a security guard, who do you think he's going to follow? Me or you?
You.
And why?
Because of the color of your skin and all the assumptions that person has.
No, he's going to follow me because he's been socialized in a racist construct. See, so what happens is that we put the problem on the people who are the victims. You're not doing this because I'm Black. No, you're doing it because of how you've been socialized and what you've accepted and therefore what you haven't challenged. Any white person who has not challenged their cognitive dissonance will act in the way in which they were socialized. So no, it's not because I'm Black. It's because you have internalized this system and you haven't done the work to deconstruct this racist attitude and belief system in your mind, and therefore discover the biases in which you're living out of, and therefore the consequences it has on me.
Yeah.
So when black people say, "Is it because I'm black?" That is the wrong question, because the answer lies in white people who have power, who are in fact protecting these systems because white people benefit from these systems.
And with that deconstruction, I thought this was a really important, concept towards practical application to start to heal racism. Could you talk a little bit about appreciative inquiry and how it may be an anti-venom to microaggression and racism as we go forward, for when people are looking for strategies and tools? This seems to me from our discussion as a really good first step. If you could explain this a little bit.
So earlier I said that, yes, this could make a difference if there's correction, context, choice, and connection. Now I'll say another C. If there's communication. If there's no communication, what can possibly happen? Nothing, right? Everything will stay the same by default. So appreciative inquiry is saying, what's my stance? What's my approach that I'm going to approach the conversation? For example, when I got in touch with you, I asked you the question, did you know about Joy Leary? I didn't start I could have came that way, right? Like, what the hell are you doing? You have a PhD and you don't include it? No, I asked you the question. I said, do you know about the work of Joy Leary? And you said no, right? So that was me starting from the point of view, do you have the information, number one? And this is on both sides of the fence, black, white, oppressor, oppressed, whatever side that you're on. If those of us on this call who are on here because we have a certain orientation, if we, in our conversation with anyone, take the position of, let me do it from a point of appreciative inquiry, you're going to get the best out of that conversation, and that conversation can create connection. That connection can create deeper conversations where we can speak about choice and context, and we can speak about correction. But it starts with us being, and I'm not going to use the word tolerant, it's us wanting to have a result, right? And wanting to have that result, asking questions in such a way where we're not blaming.
Okay, so give me a practical example. If I was doing appreciative inquiry, what might that look like?
Ask me something that you don't know about me.
Where are you from?
Well, no, something that has to do with my racial identity. There used to be this thing of saying, everything that you wanted to know about something was too afraid to ask. So now I want you, one of those deep-seated
I will.
As a white person that you wanted to know about a black man, I want you to ask me. Okay.
As I've gotten to know you, and even today, I sense some real unhealed pain and hurt about either the prejudice or discrimination that you've had to suffer as a child or even as an adult. And as you speak with passion, I also sense your hurt. And is that coming from some really structural racism you experienced as a child or even as an adult? And is that what drives you, the pain?
No. No. What drives me is that I consider myself a spiritual being having a human experience. And my incarnation on this earth at this time is, as I understand it, participated in the process of healing. So the pain isn't what is driving me. It's who I am as a spiritual being on this plane. I'm what is called a Sufi. So the pain is there. My teacher, Harzat Inyat Khan, said that recognizing joy doesn't betray your pain. And for those of us who've been oppressed, this is really the hardest thing for us to be with, in not allowing the pain of the suffering and the oppression to be the driving force of our lives, but in fact, being able to acknowledge the creation, right? When Europeans came out of Europe, they decided to pillage the world. I mean, that's just the reality of it. It was diseases in Europe, and they came out with this idea that they had to conquer everyone else. So
why is it? Why?
Let me finish. What I'm saying is that there's a choice of living out of the mentality of scarcity, or it's the choice of living out of the mentality of abundance. And what Europeans have done is they've convinced the world, they've turned the world upside down to have people of color to live out of scarcity. In fact, we were living in abundance before those interventions. So
are we doing appreciative inquiry right now, and why are we doing it? Or are we doing that right now between us?
Yes, because appreciative equality starts with the attitude that we're agreeing to be in the conversation. How uncomfortable it may be, how unknown it may be, but if you're starting with the idea that we're creating connection, then that is the spirit of inquiry. So it isn't always pleasant, it isn't always comfortable, but it's dealing with truth. So we can't heal until we, in fact, are willing to be in the conversations of truth. So I would say it is.
All right, I'm gonna be a little vulnerable here too. So as I've gotten to know you, why do you think sometimes I still feel like I walk on eggshells in our conversations? Because I'm afraid if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to put my foot in my mouth. I'm going to create more anger or trauma, like ignorance. Why do I still feel this way, even though I know you, around this issue of race? I still feel sometimes I walk on eggshells.
Because the way you've been conditioned, the way you've been socialized as a white person in this racial construction makes it so. It's in you. It's like it's in me. But we have to be brave enough to say that it's not me. You can have an idea. So this is the distinction between somebody calling you a liar versus that you are lying, right? Lying is a verb. A liar is a noun. So when we talk about racism, it's saying that we have to be able to be in these conversations and not blame or not label the person as this or that. So it's really in the conversation that we find ourselves to find the answers. Because guess what? This is the thing that we haven't really realized. All of us have been dehumanized. You've been dehumanized in a certain kind of way, and I've been dehumanized in a certain kind of way. Our peoples have been, all of us have been dehumanized. But we're living, this deals with the question of the myth and the reality. The myth is that America is this wonderful, great, bastion of human rights and abundance and everything else. But where did the abundance come from? It came from genocide of indigenous people. It came from the work and the labor and the genius of African people. And these systems are now, the benefits of those systems have been distributed in an unequal fashion. And now we are suffering because some people have all the benefits of the slaveocracy and other people don't. So the work is beginning to unpeel all these different layers that has put the system in place and starting to see what is the internalized.
What's awesome is this is a parallel process I can have with my clients. This appreciative inquiry, I can tell you, and I'm not just saying this, I feel now more relaxed with you to talk about the tough stuff because I brought it up. You were vulnerable with me. I was vulnerable with you. We're talking about the elephant that's in the room, and then I checked out assumptions with you. And, so I appreciate this because this is spontaneous, but it really shows, hopefully, everybody that's on there that this can be done. So let me show everybody just in the time we have, because we're running short on time, because I want to give people time to really ask questions and answers. And I may do more of this discussion about Midtown if we do a part 2, but I just want to give you an overview and get your thoughts about what you hear about this and how I did, with my role as a professor at Savannah State, with talking about the appreciative inquiry, but also helping move from trauma-informed to trauma responsive. So let me just share with you just a little bit and then get your comments and then hopefully others as well. So this started in 1997 when I was a brand new professor at Savannah State. I attended a lot of race relations conferences in Savannah because there was some rioting that was going on, tension. And I also was influenced by this book here, Unfaithful Angels, How Social Work Has Abandoned Its Mission. And in there, the last chapter talks about that sometimes for communities, that has been part of the social work DNA is to help facilitate community settlement houses, community centers, where the community builds their own center as kind of like a catalyst to bring about change, hope, and I was intrigued by this last chapter. So in my work with family systems, I also thought, is there a practical application framework for family systems to also pair with what I was looking at in the book Unfaithful Angels? So I approached my professor at the School of Social Work at Savannah State. I approached the president of the University, Carleton Brown, and I also approached Dr. Otis Johnson, and here's what they said to me. They said, Scott, we want you to go for it. Working with the School of Social Work and the Midtown Community, because we believe in that if we're going to move beyond just talk, we've got to rub shoulders together. We have to come together for a common goal, a common cause. They said, okay, and then Dr. Silver said, the provost, could be what's called town and gown. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I started to see that it could be possible. So in the books I wrote here, I said, okay, is there a framework within these, these principles of the book, which is traditional family therapy, could it be applied to more of a community family therapy, trauma, practical tools? So I looked at these core 12 techniques, and I'm just going to share two because of time, where this kind of was an overlay or a guide to, in my role as a facilitator, how could I work with the Midtown community to mobilize a community center if that's what they wanted, which became what they wanted, not me. And let me just show you what happened. So Midtown in Savannah, Georgia in 1997 had 3,952 black residents. It was the largest square footage in Savannah at the time, but there was the most poverty. All the statistics that you said earlier were very evident in the Midtown community. So I did an appreciative inquiry where we took the first social work class. We met with Verlinda Slaughter, who was the president of the Midtown Association. And we took a one-down position, specifically me as the only white person in the room, and just did strength-based questions like, what are the strengths in your community? What are your needs? And one of the elders in the community, Daisy Scott, said, I have bought this building that has no roof that used to be a dry cleaner for this moment, and she started to really cry, to be a way that the school, the students of Savannah State and our community could come together to build our own community center. And then they started coming up with the Midtown Community Project, Hearts and Hands Together. And this was the vision statement that really the community came up with, that we wanted to build a community center that was blessed by God, run by residents, and open to everyone. And the center would become a source of empowerment by bringing together people of all ages to become a united village and a source of hope. It was amazing because even before there was a roof on the building, We did oyster roast. We converted it into a haunted house for the kids. The community would walk around the building like Joshua, praying that this was going to happen. And in only less than a year, the energy started to take off, where the Wachovia Bank president got interested, the mayor got interested, because there was a march saying that we're going to prepare for rain, that we've got this bar that is the site next to the community center of 4 violent murders. We're going to march, even though we don't know where the money's coming from. We're going to build this community center as our own. And that inspired me to go to apply for a HUD grant with many other people, and we got it. And we were a finalist in the Jimmy Carter Community Award. So let me share with you guys just a few things that as the catalyst, what I maybe helped bring to the table. So the first thing was, I was trying to look at this generational trauma. I didn't have the ACEs pyramid, it hadn't been invented yet, but intuitively, I looked at these family systems strategies and said, we do this with families, can we also look at the Midtown community? And could there be a playbook that would help move the needle to go from theory to practice? And so let me just share with you this. So in the FST model, when we're working with kids, we put the top symptoms, which we metaphorically call weeds, or these are the apples of the tree. But then our goal is to connect it to the roots. What are the drivers? Because oftentimes you get into communities and families with only first order change, where you talk about the problem, but you're not getting to the pain. Something that we were just doing, Anaje, a second ago, we're trying to get to the roots, where I asked you the question, you said, ask me a question, Anaje, and I'm like, where are you from? Okay, that's not what I meant. Let's get to some root work here. And the dialogue started moving in this direction. So with Midtown Community, just with kids, these undercurrents are typically unresolved grief or loss, and that we have to help the family get grief education resolution, because if those undercurrents are not going to heal on their own, by osmosis, they need help. Betrayal or abandonment and forgiveness is the opposite healthy undercurrent. Family secrets, we have to reveal secrets in safety as counselors. Physical and mental abuse, we have to help the family move to support courage to heal and forgive. Lack of forgiveness, we have to help the family forgive, and lack of consistent nurturance. So in the case I just showed you, rules without relationships lead to rebellion. So to help heal that disrespect in this particular family, we're on the right undercurrent to produce second order change. In Midtown, some of the community problems were racial profiling, no housing, lack of unity, and the wounds are kind of like intuitively, as a social worker, I was looking at this in conjunction with the family, and so I looked at microaggressions. Even though I didn't have that word at the time, I saw that physical or mental abuse in families would also be racial abuse in communities, and that the anti-venom or kryptonite or the healthy undercurrent would support courage to stop, forgive, etc. Now, it could be these others as well. My point being is this, is knowing where to tap. I was trying to work with the community to say, okay, what is going to be a number one thing to bring about empowerment? And so the trauma playbook looked like this. It was an RX prescription to inject the missing healthy undercurrents. In a family, it's to realign the family structure. At Midtown, it was to empower a community. So literally, the trauma playbook was getting together with an architect and saying, this is our vision. When we do find the money, we're going to have a senior center. We're going to have a counseling center. And then every week we would meet together where Deacon Cutter, who is the pastor, would have an opening prayer. We would have a clear playbook of an agenda that clarified roles of who, what, where, when, and how. So each time we met, we had organization in the closing prayer. So the idea of the settlement house, or in this case, community center, became the catalyst, and the playbook became clarity of roles and a very methodical step-by-step approach. And so, as you can see here in the statement itself, blessed by God, run by residents, open to everyone, source of empowerment, these are all what I call, or what's called in family systems work, healthy undercurrents. And so what started to happen was Midtown, when you look at structural strategic theory, Midtown became more in charge of itself. The historical trauma racism became down here instead of up here. The playbooks or the community center helped increase community attachment. Roles were clarified, and the strategic intervention to fill in that missing healthy undercurrent, support, say no more, forgive, was the Midtown Community Center almost like a prescription to help heal the community. So that, the how is these three things. We located the unhealthy undercurrents, we replaced it with the healthy undercurrent, and then the mental health antibiotic was the playbook, in this case, the community center to help heal. So any thoughts on that before we take questions about, it was clumsy and awkward at times. My heart was open. I think, we did every class in social work, took the next step. And at the end of the day, we built the center, we closed the bar, and it was amazing to see the community be empowered and change. So any thoughts on that as you hear this story? How did I do, I guess? And I know I just gave you highlights, but this is kind of where the goal was.
Scott, I think that was truly the kind of work that needs to happen and I'm going to say that on the meso level, but of course, racism is a question of the macro level, the structures in place. So I want to bring to your attention, and this is a appreciative inquiry. I'm not making you wrong. I'm not telling you use the wrong words, but I want to bring to your attention something that you didn't realize. Two questions. One, you use the word riot. When people are oppressed, they don't riot. They are insurrections. So the very words we use says what kind of framework we are placing.
Wow.
It's saying what kind of value that we're placing on that action, right? So it's not riots, it's insurrections. Number two, you didn't say poverty-stricken, but it was very easy, could have been what you could have said. You said this group is poverty-stricken. There's no such thing as being poverty-stricken. People are put into poverty, and that poverty is intergenerational. So the lens we put on words, or the words we use, has a lens. So every word we use, there's a lens connected to it. So I'm just, not as a correction, but I'm just inviting you to look at the words you're using and understand what structures you are upholding in those words.
Excellent.
Right? So yes, it was a wonderful project, but let us also understand that even when you applied for money from the government and from different foundations, where did they get their money from? They got their money from a system of racism where people were exploited. And this is not to let the people in the North go, because of the finances in the North that financed slavery in the South. So this is not a Southern conversation. This is a United States conversation. In fact, it's an international conversation in terms of all people who've been victims of slavery and genocide are saying, let's make a world where all of us can enjoy the benefits, not that you have created, but that the Creator has created, so that we all can live a quality life, that we can have safety, we can have food, we can have shelter, and we can have the things that affirm the fact that we are all human beings.
Excellent. Thank you for, I love that, what you were just saying about words really matter. Well, let's take some time for some questions. We'll maybe go 5 minutes over for people who may have some questions. If people have to leave right at the top of the hour, that's fine. But we'll stay on a little bit longer in case people want to ask questions. But Allison, what are some of the questions that came in as we were talking today?
Well, first of all, there was a question that was related to the latter part of the presentation, to the Midtown project. Was the empowerment measured by any increase in quality of life? Is there data to measure disparate impact and disproportionality?
The answer is I wish we had done that. We did not. I mean, it was qualitative, not quantitative data, where when you walked into the Midtown Center that was, built from the ground up through, everyone's involvement, you would talk to the residents, especially the seniors. There was just unbelievable hope, and you could just see empowerment just grow. This is our building. This is ours. Because they had built a community center down the road that was built by the government, and nobody really even went to that one. So kind of the idea that Anaji was saying, wasn't from the community. So we did not have the quantitative data that, looking back, I wish we had had. Thanks.
Okay, and then there was another question that asked about at the beginning of you opened the talk relating to the anecdote about how Dr. Sells was referring to the intergenerational trauma for Indigenous and Jewish peoples, but leaving out the Black community. Did this happen before or after having worked long-term for an HBCU? And if after, can you explain how?
Well, it was not, the article was focused on the Jewish population, and the purpose of the article was around genocide, and that is an example. So it wasn't intentional in terms of leaving anyone out. But Najee came and said, what about, the Black community? And I explained to him the purpose of the article, but it led to a discussion and then a friendship and an openness. So to clarify, it wasn't done purposely or had any connection other than it was just an article written for a specific purpose.
Okay, and then someone had asked about initiating the conversations. I think when you gentlemen were talking and trying to have the questioning. So how do you begin or initiate this difficult conversation? Hey, want to talk about XYZ? Right.
I'll let Anajay say that, and I'll tell you how I do it, but go ahead, Anajay.
Yeah, it would start with that person doing some research. There's tons of information out here. There's books out here. There's a book called Birth of a White Racist Nation. So it starts with that person taking the time and doing their own education. So they're coming to the conversation with some work that they've put in, right? Some Black people feel like, wait a minute, you oppressed me and now you want me to educate you on what you should take the time and educate yourself on. So it starts with the person participating in their own education and taking the Undoing Racism. It's called Undoing Racism by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, taking that workshop so you can start to think through some things So you're going to make mistakes as a white person because you've been socialized to feel superior, even without your permission. So you're going to make mistakes. But how can you minimize the mistakes that you're going to make? You only can do that by taking yourself through an education process. Some people enter this conversation, as Joy says, some people enter this conversation on a PhD level, and some people enter this conversation on an elementary level. So we'll start there, and that's the starting point. And then if you read some things, find someone that, tell them, why you want to have a conversation, and ask permission. Can you have a conversation? Human relationships have four choices: consent, relationship, empowerment, and abundance. So you have to ask consent. Can I have this conversation with you? And you tell the person the reason why, and they'll tell you. And you're going to get some no's. Let me tell you from the beginning, you're going to get some no's. But you're going to find somebody who has a yes, because we know mitakoyo yase, all our relations. The four-legged, the two-legged, those that crawl, those that swim, that we are all related. So you're going to find people who want to be in a conversation with you, because guess what? We are all living on this earth at the same time, and what we all do collectively is going to make a difference. So you're going to find a yes. You might have to go through 10 no's before you get a yes, but you're going to find one.
Yeah, my onboarding question is to always talk about strengths first. When I see someone new, I ask them the question, as I get to know you better, what qualities will I come to admire about you? And that's taking, a one-down position, but I'm wanting to appreciate their strengths. Even if they can't think of any, I might guess. And then if I will just be real open. I'll say, one of the things is that we are different colors. And if at any time I say or do something where I put my foot in my mouth, or I'm not honoring what's going on with the trauma, I like to just bring it up right away, but I always want to start with strengths first, because people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so I have found over my career that it really is a pattern interrupt, because people that have been oppressed, and there's already a hierarchy in the relationship as I am a doctor or a healer. And when you take a one-down position and appreciative inquire about their strengths and listen before you try to be understood, that is a good place to start. If I get to know you better, what qualities will I come to admire about you as a parent, person, an individual? That's how I begin my appreciative inquiry.
And that's part of the Family Trauma Institute's approach. So people certainly, I'm encouraging everyone to take the course. 2 points. One is that it's good that Scott and the people who participate in that process, but the other side of the coin is white people going back and talking to their cousins and their brothers and their uncles and their fathers about this problem. Right? Black people, we don't have access to your family. You do. So yes, the ghettos need to be de-ghettoized and need to be made into livable environments. Yes, that needs to happen. And that can only happen when white people who are well-meaning, Scott is a well-meaning white person, he has good intentions. But at the same time, it's still learning that he and all white people have to go through, because if they had gone through it, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now. Right? So there's another level of learning that has to take place. So well-meaning white people can participate in the process by talking to other white people so they can become well-meaning as well, with the proper definition of racism by the People's Institute of Survival and Beyond. And again, I'm going to encourage you to take the Undoing Racism by the People's Institute about Survival and Beyond, that will give you the education that your whole life you've been denied for a purpose.
Good. Yeah, and I also give myself permission to be awkward and clumsy and put my foot in my mouth. And so that helps a lot, too. Any other questions we had, Allison, before we go? We have time for 2 more. I
said there was a second point. The second point is, can white people take leadership from people of color? That's the other part of the equation that we haven't talked about, but that's equally important as well.
Okay.
Okay, so we do have a couple more. We do have a couple more questions. So one was, a participant said, I would say my heart was more open to discussions around racism and racial injustice when I heard stories from Black mothers about raising their children in America. Have the panelists found these stories to be effective in helping white communities understand racism better?
Go ahead, Anandre.
Is that a question?
I think it was a question, like, I think the question was, have you found that stories perhaps with more emotion or more relatableness? I'm going out on a limb and doing some interpretation, Anandre. Do you find that those stories help white communities connect better and understand better because we can relate to being mothers, we can relate to similar things?
I would say yes and a no, and this is why I say yes and no. Yes, because for white women to say, wait a minute, I don't have to tell my son when he goes outside, you know, remember to do this. I don't have to worry about if my son is going to come back because he's going to be shot, not only by a white police officer, but he can be shot by another Black person, right? That's the structure of oppression. So I would say yes on that level. On the other side, I would say no. And the no comes from the fact that Europeans, white people who have characterize Black people as being over-emotional, being too emotional. So sometimes that emotional part that could be a bridge to common humanity can also be a reason not to connect because when you're too emotional about it. So I would have to say yes and no.
Okay, and then we have another question on the topic of language. How do we reconcile the style of speech that we grew up with versus being politically correct? Or being Black versus being African American? I've gotten backlash for using either term.
You know, on those kind of questions, you know, in social work, we use the principle that's called self-determination, that people define themselves. In fact, there's a principle called Kujichagulias, self-determination, to name ourselves, to speak for ourselves instead of being defined and spoken by others. So you just ask the person, how do you identify? How would you like me to relate to you in terms of I call you Black or African American, or what is your choice? You let them give the choice, because in the Black community, you're going to find a person who calls themselves Negro, you're going to find a person that calls themselves colored, you're going to find a person who calls themselves African American, you're going to find a person who calls themselves an African American, because our identity had the purpose of the way in which oppression happened, it had to take away our identity. So many of us are ahistorical. We don't even know our roots. We can't even tell you where we came from in Africa, right? So you would have to ask the person, they'll tell you, and then you go with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm seeing Robin's chat, and I appreciate what she put in there about me not being anti-racist yet, but I disagree, Robin, respectfully. I know what research you're saying, you know, to support your argument about, you know, empathy. All I can say is that I can't judge anybody, but I guess just my heart is just not there. I just have high levels of empathy. And so I think if we start going down self-fulfilling prophecies of saying, you know, like anti-racist yet, I don't think that's fair, because you don't really know my heart, and you can't quote research like that white people don't have high levels of empathy to Black people's pain. Proxy racism is a thing, the result of assimilation into white supremacy. I would say it can work both ways. If we get into self-fulfilling prophecies that white people can't change, or someone like me is not anti-racist yet, I think that limits us, because when we label, we negate. And so I just caution that, yeah, I may have blind spots. I always will. I think Anandre is going to have blind spots. We always will. But recognizing that and continuing to go forward with, you know, our hearts is important. And I don't know if Anandre, if you want to speak to that.
I think you're missing the point. The point that this person is referring to is that diversity is a horizontal conversation. You know, you put on your clothes, I put on my clothes, we bring some food. That's saying we're having a horizontal conversation. The real question is the vertical conversation around power, right? So anti-racist is when someone has done the work, not just in terms of what they feel about something, in terms of their heart, but they have become engaged in a lifestyle that they are looking for racism, and when they find it, they are doing things against it, right? So as a white person, you can love me, and I think you do, and you respect me, and I think you do. But that's not being anti-racist. Or anti-racist is someone who's now using their position, their privileged position, right, which is really unjust enrichment. They're using their privileged position to deconstruct the system that created racism, and that's creating the statistic that I gave presence to. So you're on the path to become an anti-racist, but you're not there yet. And this is the point I had said before. Can you take leadership from a black person or a person of color? That's the other part of not just talking to other white people, but can you take, so the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond saying that this is part of the formula for us to get out of it. Why? Because we happen to be experts on the subject.
Okay. Well, I mean, the answer is yes, as I was a professor at Savannah State, and I looked at people's character, not the color of their skin. So it was the character of the person and the leadership that I was under in Savannah State and other places. So yes, I have taken leadership from in that context, but I'm still learning, and I will admit that, I have blind spots, but I understand what you're saying about it's really tested when can you fall under the leadership of a black person or and how you handle that. And so I guess my point is I have, but I just think it is an interesting discussion. So, yep. So, all right. Any other questions, Allison?
Well, I know we do need to get going. I will say that we are going to share this video link with everyone who is registered for the webinar, and that link can be shared. There was some requests for a link to the whole video that was shown earlier in the presentation. I will try to get that and include that in the follow-up email to everyone as well. Just there was many comments and resources that were shared during the webinar. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking the time to share your voice during this presentation and for sharing the resource link. I think that this is all definitely a journey, and so we are definitely thankful for you being on it with us today. So I'll close this part. Panelists, if you have anything to share.
I want to thank my dear friend Scott for inviting me to be in this conversation with him. Those of you, people would know that I just finished, visiting him and his family in Montana, and I had a wonderful time. So my friend, I want to thank you so much to be on this journey with you together. And my closing statement is to honor the 4 directions. Aho, 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 aho. Thank you.
And I want to say thank you too, Anaje. These are the types of discussions we need to have, even though they can be difficult, but they can also be just really wonderful. So I appreciate you guys coming on today, and I look forward to having further discussions. And I've really enjoyed sharing our hearts today, and thank you everybody for being on the call today. So have a great week, everybody. Take care. Thanks.